We really care about quality design. That is the first thing. That's our North Star. It just makes it all the easier for me to kind of make that convincing pitch. As a solutions engineer or sales engineer is going to be to a sales executive or an account executive. We're someone who works alongside the people selling software. I believe that SEs fundamentally are here to provide hope to a customer through our clever storytelling, through our ability to solve the problems that they're working through.
Welcome back to the Spring Studio Spotlight podcast. Today's guest is Vish Mittapalli. He's a solutions engineering leader over at Coda. We dive into all things design, sales, and entrepreneurship. I especially like how we touched on how design plays such a critical role in sales and how both sales and design should have a seat at the table so they can stay in sync with one another. Sales can sell the product better. The product can learn from sales and the sales process, especially the feedback that the sales team gets from being out in the field, talking with real users. I think designers are going to love this episode, salespeople, entrepreneurs. It was a really fun conversation. Please enjoy.
Being in my role where I am required to tell stories, I enjoy telling stories, that is my purpose. It brings this level of animation and joy that's just, hopefully people can hear it from my voice. Even an amazing designer can do something absolutely beautiful, but if it has no correlation with what that ultimate customer constituent really cares about, I'm sorry, it's just a beautiful design then.
Any advice for founders that are building something, that are looking to improve the way they sell?
I think it's really about making sure you understand design is more than just a product. It's everything that you do and say as a company. It's about caring about the little things.
Vish, good afternoon. How are you?
How's it going, dude?
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, man.
For those of you listening, watching, Vish and I go way back. That's a story for another day, but we are close homies. I've learned a lot from Vish over the years, so I'm excited to pick his brain a little bit and learn even more this afternoon.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So maybe you can start by giving us a little bit of background, who you are, what you're up to right now. I know this is going to be a slight departure from our usual guests. I'm excited to have somebody from the other side of the organization sharing some helpful tidbits. So yeah, maybe you can share a little bit of your background and what you're currently up to.
Yeah. All right. So I am a dad of two and a little fur baby. I got an amazing wife. Live out here in the East Bay in the San Francisco Bay Area. And working for a small software startup company called Coda. And I guess a little bit about me before then, man, I guess I had a bit of a wild journey. My background's in astrophysics, believe it or not. It came as a result of, watching a Simpsons episode. Maybe we talked about that in the past. I don't know. Happy to talk about that again at some point. But what I'm doing now is very different. I'm in, tech sales, and started my career at Box. The best cloud content management company in the world. Hey, Aaron. And yeah, grew my career through Box, then through Slack, and now I'm at Coda.
Awesome. You said through Slack. You spent how many years at Slack?
I spent 5.5 years at Slack. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we met just before you joined Slack, right? Like you were tail end of your Box career.
That's right.
And then joined Slack.
Yeah, I think I was at Box for another 1.5 or 2 years when you and I first met, and then had an opportunity to help grow the team and start with a bunch of amazing people at Slack, and couldn't resist. It's an amazing product. Still is.
Still is. We use it every single day, all day long. Maybe we use it too much. I don't know.
I don't think there's too much.
So you said you're in tech sales over at Coda. What is your title over there?
I'm a solutions engineering leader.
Solutions engineering leader. Sound to me as a designer, it's like I have no idea what that means. Can you give us the elevator spiel or the elevator pitch for your role? What exactly do you do as a solutions engineer leader?
It sounds like that scene from Will Ferrell where he's like, no one knows what it means, but it's just provocative.
It's provocative, and it sounds really smart.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm going for, and that's the whole illusion, right? I get asked this question a lot. I suppose my TLDR response for this is that we're product experts. I like to tell people that are not in the know that we're the nerdy people helping people sell stuff so they can buy stuff from people. It's a lot of people's there. And if I were to give you an analogy that you can probably relate closer to, think of it as like a designer is going to be to a product manager, as a solutions engineer or sales engineer is going to be to a sales executive or an account executive. We're someone who works alongside the people selling software. And I've developed sort of a poetic explanation sometimes to some people, in saying that I believe that SEs fundamentally are here to provide hope to a customer through our clever storytelling, through our ability to solve the problems that they're working through. And one of my mentors, Zach Lorick, who's actually one of the managers at OpenAI, he manages the global SE team. He's the one that has a really truly poetic response to this, which is like an SE is someone that you're going to use to architect the story you want to tell through the product. And I don't think I can say it better than myself.
That's really well said. To me, what that means is there's like I find some parallels between design and the role of an SE, where the role of a designer is to kind of, I mean, one of the many roles of a designer is to, and this is specifically product designer, so UI UX designer, is to essentially craft a solution for a user through either a series of screens, user flows, prototypes. You're creating a new experience, showing the possibilities of what the product could be after built. It sounds like to you, like as an SE, you're crafting a story, you're crafting a narrative for what that solution can be to a large organization like Visa or like whoever, right? You're like, this is how our products can be embedded into your specific needs, your specific use case, and here's how it might look.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there, especially with your specific needs and your specific use case, because even a amazing designer can do something absolutely beautiful, but if it has no correlation with what that ultimate customer constituent really cares about, I'm sorry, it's just a beautiful design then.
It's a design that's going to end up on Dribbble, and it's going to look really nice. No, that this is not a knock to Dribbble. Like, I've hired a number of designers with amazing Dribbble portfolios, but oftentimes the context is lost in just the beautiful designs that are found on that platform or Instagram, any other platform. So, like, truly understanding like what it is that we're trying to solve, I think is that little piece that is necessary but often lost in the Dribbles of the world.
Yep, 100%.
Cool. So I'd love to maybe pivot into like the intersection between SaaS sales, like we were just talking about, and design, because I think there are a lot of parallels to draw between the two. Can you think of maybe an example where good design has helped you maybe close deals or improve customer satisfaction, like from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Obviously, I'm going to be a little biased here and talk a little bit about my own company, Coda. Coda is an all-in-one surface that brings the best parts of spreadsheets, docs, apps all into one. And with the tagline of "Let's make Coda the default cursor for the next billion people and $1 billion people." Yeah. And I think it's obviously a phenomenal product, and it's capable of so much power. And I think where really good design comes in, it's interjected throughout the entire thing, right? We internally pride ourselves on this kind of framework called paper cuts and resolving paper cuts. You've undoubtedly had paper cuts yourself. They suck. They hurt. They suck. But they're small. They're not life-threatening. But have enough of them, you're not going to be a happy camper, right? And I think, we spend a considerable amount of time on just making those little details that people stumble upon randomly and have moments of joy because we took that time and energy to really pay attention to it. And I think the best SaaS tools like Slack and Box and others, they do that. It's not something so overtly obvious all the time. It's the little things that, when added up, create these magical moments. Thinking about this a little bit more, I think, there's this one thing that we did early on where people are working through formulas. Coda can enable people to create formulas to really up-level their Coda docs. And the goal is to help help them connect tables together, help them connect data sets, and create ultimately apps to power their workflows. And there was this one thing specifically that we did that I thought was just absolutely magical, where when users are trying to create these formulas, we provide these little contextual clues like iconography and colors and everything else that help them understand, like, okay, when you're working on this data set, you're looking at this column, this row, this table, you're looking at a array, you're looking at an individual number, you're looking at a list of values, whatever the situation is. And that has this unintended consequence of helping that user sort of figure out how to construct the formula. And it creates this like serendipity, if you will, that you're able to create something super powerful just by stumbling along. And it was intuitive. It was right there in front of you, and it was sort of kind of guiding you to that next step. And I think
that's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's when I can demo and tell those little stories. They add up. They mean something.
Sure. And not only that, but it's one of those things where you're not only eliminating friction points, because like any little bit of friction, especially in the early stages of a product, like users are going to experience some friction. They're gonna experience like, what do I do now? Like the dead end, the cul-de-sac. Like, what do I do now? Okay, I need to leave and I need to go back and I need to go over here. But anytime you can eliminate those friction points, those cul-de-sacs, by introducing something delightful, like you said, those little delightful moments that help guide you through the process, that help you really start to understand the product, find those so rare. But when I find them, I am like so delighted and so excited to use the product. For those listening, Vish has been working at Coda for a long time. Coda, if you don't know, is a direct Notion competitor. Or I'm not going to put words in either company's mouths. I view them as competitors. We've been using Notion for a long time, and let's just say Vish has been very very friendly and not pushy when it comes to getting me, his good friend, to move over to Coda instead of
Sales is sometimes about playing the long game, man. I'm not over.
It's the long game. You're going to check back in 5 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, all right, it's time. It's time. Oh, I love it. So that kind of speaks to my other point. Like, I talk a lot internally and both kind of out into the void, whoever wants to listen. I talk a lot about the importance of products being design led or design first. It sounds like Coda has taken a similar approach to creating that product. How do you personally feel from sales side, not necessarily like building the actual product, but getting to benefit from the built product? How do you feel about design led or design first companies and design first products?
I mean, I think it creates sort of this like kind of, I'm going to bring on my Astro hat here, but I think it creates a sort of gravitational pull towards wanting to use the product. As much for me, the employee, so to speak, for the company, and especially being in my role where I am required to tell stories. I enjoy telling stories. That is my purpose. It brings this level of like animation and joy that's just, I mean, hopefully people can hear it from my voice, but like if I believe in those little moments of serendipity, those little elements of design that help reinforce that, okay, we really care about quality design. That is the first thing. That's our North Star. It just makes it all the easier for me to kind of make that convincing pitch.
I like that. Yeah. And it's almost like, not only does it make your job easier, but it's almost like it's a no-brainer at that point. You're just like, this is the best solution for you.
I mean, it spoils you because if you're interacting with not just like wonderful UI, but a wonderful flow. I mean, obviously, I think you know this better than many, but design isn't just about the static thing you're looking at. It's something larger. It's something more in aggregate. And I think that is what brings you back. It pulls you in. And whenever you find something that's similar, but not quite that exact same wonderful flow, you hate it. And you just want to get rid of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It could be the most beautiful looking product in the world, but if you are frustrated at every turn throughout the experience, you're never coming back.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah. So we went to Figma's annual conference together, Config. I had a lot of memorable moments. I had, there were a number of talks that I really really enjoyed. Um, specifically Shashir's talk that he gave. Shashir is the CEO of Coda. I was fortunate enough to listen to one of his talks, and it really resonated with me. I was really really happy to be able to be there and to learn from him. We'll drop a link to the recording in the show notes for anybody who's interested. Were there any talks that stood out to you from the conference? I mean, we watched, I don't know, probably a dozen of them, but any specifics?
Yeah, config was awesome. Like, shout out to the event team, to Dylan and everybody else over at Figma to pull that off. It was just a wonderfully immersive experience, and it was clear that as we were walking around, going from booth, talking with different customers and users, you are there because you fundamentally believe in that product. I think there were legitimately very few prospects that either hadn't been exposed to Figma or maybe are piloting it and they just haven't made the commitment, but they're already in it. So that was really, interesting to see that consistent energy. But there's one talk that I think, I remember commenting about how resonant this was, and this is from the browser company based in New York. For I suppose anyone who hasn't used it yet, definitely consider downloading Arc. And it's just a wonderful product to use, very powerful, very sleek. And there was a story that their head of storytelling. I mean, seriously, that is an amazing title.
It's such a good title.
One day, if I ever have the opportunity to kind of cater my own title, I'm going to consider that. But the head of storytelling at the browser company and their brand lead, they were talking about the importance of design in every bit of the approach throughout the entire life cycle of the product, not just the sale, not just the usage or the adoption, but like the ethos of the company is like buried into this. They call it leaving your digital footprints. And I think the thing that really stood out to me was just, again, the little things that created this sense of cohesion. I think if I remember right, they created these things called the digital cards that allowed like early users and adopters to sort of express their individuality and creativity. And that immediately created this, like, I don't know, I felt like it created this sense of a club or a belonging. And it pulled you more towards Arc. And it wasn't so much Arc's own kind of pretty cool design and flow and UI, but it was more than that. It was a company, it was a product, it was everything they were putting out, it was the way you engage with them. That I think was the aha moment for me that really resonated when Dylan was talking about design is more than just the product.
Yeah, I love that. I also enjoyed that talk a lot. And to kind of piggyback off of your point, one line that stuck out to me, and like this is coming from somebody who loves clean, simple, modern design. Some people, including the ARC folks, might call it sterile. Sterile design. They dropped that word a couple times. I'm like, oh well, I still like it. But they used a
Oh, I'm not going to
term.
weigh in there.
They used a term that I really loved that has stuck with me for a long time. We want our product, we want our browser, we want any products that we build to feel lived in. And I'm like, oh, that's so good. We don't want it to feel sterile. We don't want it to feel like a hospital or like, and no knock to the Apple store. Like you can see my setup is like designed as like the Apple store, but like the Apple store to some might not feel lived in. And they really wanted to bring this sense of like warmth, and we want this thing, this digital product to feel like it's been lived in, like a living room or something.
I remember that as well. And one thing just hit me as you were talking there is, if you think about like home shopping, you've bought a home before, and you think about home shopping, and there's a clear difference in terms of the number of homes that are sold that are staged, right? They have that lived in look. They have that capacity to allow you to say, oh, I can. It's a Friday. I'm having a drink with my family, eating a bag of chips. I can visualize that. Versus, here are four walls and some doors and maybe a toilet if you're lucky.
Yes. Yes.
So
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, maybe that's a wildly different analogy, but that's sort of the first thing that comes to mind. And incidentally, that reminds me of storytelling. I mean, that lived in feel has it's got to have some story and some history behind it, and that maybe creates an allure, and that again, in my opinion, starts to feed into this concept of cohesion within design.
Yeah, I agree. And for what it's worth, I do believe, like, I look at Coda, and the product also feels lived in. The product feels not only intentional and design led and all of that fun stuff, but it does feel lived. It has that feel as well. And again, I'm not a Coda user, so like, or
No,
not a
that I
Coda
agree, not
power,
yet.
not a Coda power user. But the few times that I have used it, I was like, okay, this does feel really nice. It feels lived in. It feels intentional. So maybe one of these days. I don't know. So maybe shifting focus just a little bit. Can you talk about maybe your process when selling to enterprise or chatting with enterprise, and how design might play a more tangible role? Like we can talk about the experience of like highlighting the product and all of that. Any sort of deliverables or collateral that you like to use when um, when selling to enterprise?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, there's probably a thought to who within that enterprise that you're probably selling to. Is it a decision maker? Is it someone who's perhaps a few levels down, more closely familiar or intimate with the product or problem, I should say? And depending on that, I'll kind of flop between a couple of different things. I have used Figma to tell a story, to make a demo, to make a case. I've used Slideware. I've used obviously in product live demos and Looms. It's a total game changer, by the way, when you can finish a call and come back to a prospect with a more thoughtful response on a Loom. Um, and I think the way that I've incorporated specific elements when I'm selling to enterprises will largely depend on who I'm selling. If I'm talking to a higher up, chances are likely that I'm probably showing them something more abstract, not necessarily the product. I'm showing something at a higher level that is closer to the corresponding business challenge and objective that they have at large. And if I'm talking to someone who is more intimately familiar with the business process and the challenge, I'm probably going to use as my modality the product itself, doing a live demo and kind of focusing on the elements that are relevant to the situation.
And are you suggesting maybe the higher you go, the less interested they might be in like the little things about the product? Their main concern or their main uh, thing they're thinking through is like, okay, well, how can this solve this specific use case? I don't really care how it gets solved as long as it gets solved in a more efficient way or something.
I think it tends to be the average. I don't think it's a universal truth. I don't think it's a gospel, but I do think that based on my collective experience, it does seem to trend that way. I mean, executives have a lot on their hands. They have a lot of different priorities that they need to juggle. And the reality is, a lot of the products that I sell aren't necessarily immediately adopted by the executives. They're adopted by the people that report to that executive. It's not always the case. I mean, Slack was Slack. Every human within the organization ended up using it. But believe it or not, it didn't start that way. Some of the earliest execs for large companies that deployed Slack immediately were still on email. And it took a minute to get them to understand the power and capability of Slack, even for execs. But I think there's something to be said about the type of executive as well. I know for a fact that I've met some execs in like Fortune 10 companies that are very hands on. Like I'm talking about CIOs that want to see product demos, that want to actually play around, maybe even identify bugs. So they are there, but I think this tends to, people that want to care a little bit more at a high level, and you have to respond in a high level way.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've also met some execs that are product obsessed, where they can't.
Yeah.
It's almost like they can't help it. It's just like, oh, this is going to be used in our organization, or we're considering this. Like, let me deep dive. Like, let me deep dive into this. Give me the product demo. Let me use it for a week, and then I'll let you know. So, kind of based on that, like, we at Spring Studio, our core demo is like the small startups, right? It's the 5 to 15 or 20 people startups that are building a product. They may or may not have already found product market fit, but they're building a product. And I think the next step for a lot of these folks might be trying to sell to enterprise. Um, do you have any thoughts on what they can think about, especially in this moment when they're small enough and nimble enough to make some big decisions quickly, what they can think about or what they can focus on to make their product a little bit more appealing to enterprise?
Depends on where you are within the enterprise. Like, have you heard or read Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore? I can give you the
maybe a while
quick
ago.
TLDR.
Maybe a while
Okay, so there's
ago.
a chasm, right? And you got things to the left and things to the right, and basically, oh god, this is going to be a terribly public shaming here, but the quick high level TLDR here is that you have certain companies and organizations that are very quick to adopting new technologies and new methodologies and ways of working, and then you have other companies that take a long time, the laggard, so to speak. When we say we're selling to the enterprise, I think people often take an assumption that we're talking to the old established old guards of the world, the laggards that are on the way right side of that chasm, so to speak. And in those situations, again, depending on who you're talking to, I think the advice I would have is meet the altitude. Like, if it is a really high level executive and you've thoughtfully done your discovery and you determine that they're not someone who likes to be in the weeds, abstract the value of your product. Sure, show screenshots, maybe show GIFs, whatever it is you need to do, but abstract the level of your product so that you match the altitude of the problem that they are aiming to solve. And depending on the type of enterprise or the industry, maybe they're more regulated, maybe they're more security conscious. If they're a healthcare company, they're obviously going to be only in all thinking about, like, okay, I don't care how cool your product is, but I also don't want to get sued. I don't want to go to jail. So please tell me that you can secure my product. So I tend to kind of figure out what those situations are. And in those specific instances, we're like, oh, I'm talking to someone who's in financial services, I'm probably going to get through our technical capabilities really quickly. Oh yeah, we can do authentication, we can do security, we have, reporting and auditing and all that stuff, just so they know that they can continue listening to everything else I have to say.
Because that is table stakes for them. We can't go any further unless you have
and,
these,
like
these
DOA,
things.
exactly.
Yeah. That makes sense. I like that. So kind of thinking back to your time selling to enterprise, like we just kind of touched on what maybe founders and what smaller teams can start to think about when selling, like when considering taking that leap, taking that next step to start to sell to enterprise. What are some of the common challenges that you've seen in your career selling to enterprise? I know you've worked at, from Box to Slack to now Coda, like you've had pretty big teams behind you or pretty big products behind you. So like, I would imagine there were some challenges, but you're also talking about a company like Box or like Slack that is not huge, but like is big enough to start to sell to enterprise relatively confidently.
Yeah, I mean, there's something definitely to be said about small companies punching above their weight class and selling to like juggernauts, right? It happens all the time. It's happening to Coda. It's happened to Slack before they became big. It's happened to Box, and they were all very successful. It may sound like an awfully embarrassing problem for sales teams everywhere, but like, it is knowing that some of the execs that you're talking to might not really understand how bad those paper cuts are. They understand that you might not be meeting the reports or the deadlines on time. They might have a vague notion of why you're not doing it, but they don't really live it. You, ideally, being a talented salesperson or a company who's who's a seller, you do your due diligence, you do your discovery, and kind of uncover all of this. But then now you should start thinking about, how do I convey all of that? No one's necessarily going to care that it is taking 15 clicks to get through that specific drop down of a particular business problem. But they'll likely care that when you have to solve 15 of those specific challenges, that's a lot of clicks, and that's probably about 30 minutes of your time at your high tech paying salary job. So that starts to add up a little bit. So what I'm finding, I suppose, is that there's a lack of knowledge that some of these paper cuts are really, really bad for ICs, and figuring out what the right way to communicate what those paper cuts mean for the business, I think, is a huge thing that, I think everybody still grows in figuring out how to say.
Okay, so slight pivot here. For those building products, it sounds like find a way to figure out what those paper cuts are and create a solution. It's like going from 0 to 1. Like the founders that are just builders, right? They want to build something, they want to start a company. Here's the challenging question: is like how can you find out what those paper cuts are if you don't have a direct line into the organization, if you can't see what they're up to all day every day? Like how can you start to find out what those paper cuts are?
Recently I was pitched on a product for handling security questionnaires. It's something that solutions engineers and sales engineers have to do a lot. Company wants to buy your product. They have a number of security questions that they feel that they have to meet before they can move forward. And this product kind of aims to try and accelerate that process, make it easier on the SE to fill all of that out. And this was a really small company. I'm talking like 5-6 people total. Like you have the CEO, a designer, to a product manager, and the rest are devs. And I felt the pitch was really compelling to me in particular, even though this person had no access to Coda, no access to anybody else other than me. They were coming in very cold. And the thing that really stood out was they started the conversation quite quickly with, "Hey, I've done this for years. And I remember back in the day, I was using this tool. That process was so bad. So many nights where I had to deal with X." And it was all these like sort of relational storytelling that they did. And that got me going like, yeah, I'm going through that now. And they found a way to relate to me before they really introduced the capabilities of their product. And that pulled me in to want to listen a little bit more.
For sure.
And I thought that was pretty
They
clever.
they were speaking directly to you, your experience, because they had a very similar experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really key way to get a hold of somebody's attention and kind of make sure that you are making an impact and you are designing tools. And your question specifically was like, how do you go about finding all those paper cuts? Use your own story.
Nice.
If your story might have paper cuts, and those paper cuts might be different than theirs, but the overall story is the same. So just get the bridge in, just get that communication and build that rapport.
Love it. Find your own paper. If you want to start something, find a paper cut that you have yourself based on your story, your history, your last job, whatever it is, and find a way to solve it better than anybody.
Exactly.
That was good. So taking a slight pivot, slight detour to your relationship with design, like from a sales side, your relationship with your design team over at Coda, and maybe design teams over at Slack and previously Box. How can sales and design collaborate even more effectively? Because I know like it can be a little siloed. Like design is probably super busy. They have a huge backlog. So does sales. Sales is focused on a bunch of stuff. But how can we bridge that gap a little bit more effectively and find a way to collaborate more?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. There's probably a level of, oh gosh, it's going to depend, and that's true for many things in life, and I think that's true here as well. Like if you're a really, really small shop, ideally you are doing what you can to ensure all of the knowledge that you get from customer interactions, from executive meetings, from requirements, whatever it is shared pretty equally. I mean, 5 people, you don't really have an excuse. Get on the Zoom call and just tell everybody what you've learned, or more importantly, post it in Slack so people can continue working and getting stuff done, right? I think the one thing that I've learned, I've absolutely had the pleasure of working with a lot of design teams in the past, jumping into tools like Figma and just understanding how it is that they're doing things. And what I've come to learn is that there's a surprising lack of knowledge of how customers are actually using the products that they're working so hard to build. They have this concept, they have this idealized flow that they're doing. And sometimes that flow gets, it's done differently. It's not done differently in a bad way. It's still done differently in a very delightful way, but it's just different. And that creates this like, oh, whoa, did not expect people to use my service like that, or my product or my feature like that, whatever the case is. And I've noticed that sometimes that simply happens because people are not, designers I should say, are not getting raw feedback directly from the field. It sometimes goes through product managers or project managers or TPMs, and that gets summarized and displayed back in aggregate with product design and engineering meetings that often leave go to market folks out. So I guess what I've learned is that either you have a really really good set of PMs that are capable of taking everything that your company is learning from the field and putting that right back into your design, so you're making an iteratively better product each and every single time, or you find a way to include design in some of those meetings. It doesn't always work, especially if your organization is very large. One thing that I've been a part of that was very successful in the past was actually at Box, where we had a weekly sprint meeting with the SEs, other members of the sales team, design, and PMs. And it was to review some of the product requests that have been coming in. And everyone was up to date. Obviously, that couldn't scale because the conference room only held like 10 people, and Box was a hyper growth company. So like a couple of months later, we were already like several hundreds larger. So eventually what we moved to a model of was this kind of like ambassador program, where you have an ambassador from sales, you have an ambassador from design, you have an ambassador from product, and they are the ones that are getting together, and their responsibility is to their constituents. If I'm representing the SEs, I'm representing the SEs. And that I found is a very effective way to make sure that design gets the information they need. And it also creates a better collaboration between design and sales. Usually that, like I said, there's that step in the middle, right?
Yeah, it sounds so healthy. And I think this is something that the design community, specifically designers, have been calling for and asking for a long time. And I think we've gotten better at most orgs, specific, like I want to say most orgs like past the startup phase, maybe they're at scale up or just already found product market fit and just crushing it. They've been asking for a seat at the table, and I think this is a great representation of what that seat at the table can be. Getting that direct line, that direct source of product feedback, but also requests, and like understanding in a more deeper, more intimate way how our users are using this product, and is it in line with our assumptions? Because that's a big thing. It's like we can make assumptions all day. We can do a little bit of product research and user research off to the side, get that feedback off to the side. But unless you're talking to the people who are directly talking to the power users, the people that are using the product every day, all day, or even the folks that are coming in using the product once a week, like they're using the product in a very, very, very different way than what you were assuming.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a fantastic opportunity for sales to learn from design, and from design to learn from sales.
Yeah, I agree. And so often it seemed like there's been this issue, like butting heads, not wanting to link up, not wanting to share information, not wanting to share feedback, not wanting to share with sales because sales is gross or design is on their pedestal or whatever it is. It's like, now if everybody can just kind of come together.
Design gets on their pedestal, really?
Come on now. I was on that pedestal for a long time.
Oh man.
Don't worry.
Well, I mean, sales can be very, very persnickety, so to speak.
Persnickety. Good word.
Yeah.
Good word. Awesome. So kind of thinking about customer feedback iteration, how important is customer feedback to the team at Coda?
Customer feedback is existential to us. Like we need it. Like we live because we are trying to fundamentally create something so impactful, right? Like we want to be that next blinking cursor for the next billion knowledge workers. And to do that, we need to really understand what those knowledge workers need and how they want to use our product. So just the other day, in fact, I was working with one customer on Slack, and they had a number of little tiny things that they noticed, some paper cuts. An example of which is like taking an image in Coda and just dragging it to the middle of the page. We use standard browser functionality of being able to automatically scroll so the user could deposit the image where they needed to. But default libraries out there kind of speed up some of that scroll process. It's standard, everyone does it. And it's totally normal code, very scalable and everything else, but it leaves something to be desired. So the customer recorded a loom, shared it with me. I looked at it and I filed a feedback request process, and out came a message from the product team directly on Slack, and it was really impactful because this person was like, "Okay, yeah, I see what they mean. It is working as intended, but just because it's working as intended doesn't mean it can't be improved upon. Maybe there's some additional logic we can put to help smoothen that scroll." Okay, well, how they do that? All right, I'm not an engineer. That's beyond me. But the fact that we were paying attention to these little things that all add up and kind of create this allegiance to the brand is huge. I think that's how Slack became so successful. That's obviously how Figma has become so successful. People love the tool. People love the company.
Here's a question for you, because what I just heard was not only your engineering team is open to improvements and to making the product even better based on feedback, but what I heard was that user felt so comfortable sharing even the smallest little annoyance with you. How did you create and craft that relationship for them to feel so comfortable and excited to share an annoying paper cut?
Well, I was taught by the best. I
What does
think
that mean?
yeah, exactly. No, I think in all honesty, it's just making sure that I'm doing my job right. I'm attempting to build relationships with the people that I'm selling to. Right. It's not just about them hearing a convincing pitch or a wonderful presentation or slideware or whatever the case is, but it is about making sure they understand I am their partner. And it goes back to one of the first things I talked a little bit about. Like, what does an SE do? It's an SE is a person that can tell that story about something that matters to the customer, to the prospect. And you can only do that by understanding what matters to them. So if I don't do a good job of continuing to really make it all about them in the beginning, I can't possibly hope to earn their trust.
Yeah. Yeah. Build a relationship.
Rapport.
Rapport. Love it. All right. In closing, what any advice for founders that are building something, that are looking to improve the way they sell to not only enterprise but anybody? Like, I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
This is a selfish question, by the way.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. No, I don't think it's too much of a departure from what we chatted about. But I think going back to that Figma breakout that we discussed with the browser company, I think it's really about making sure you understand design is more than just a product. It's everything that you do and say as a company. It's how you think, how you treat your customers, how you treat your adopters, your early adopters, and it's about caring about the little things. Yes, you can continue to iterate, you can continue to get fast feedback and make the product better and everything else, but I don't think it stops there. I think it has to extend through everything. It extends to your pitch. Everything has to have a degree of like consistency. And I think that creates that sort of cohesion. I know I've used that word a bunch already, but I can't think of a better one. And I've been a part of like sales pitches on the other side of the table, right? Where they immediately focus on my pain as a user. Phenomenal. That's great. Thank you for listening to my pain. But it leaves me wanting to know a whole lot more about what the rest of the story is. Okay, what is it about my pain that I'm going to uniquely solve with your product? And how is solving it going to make me leave me feeling like, oh man, I can't live without this. And I think the way to do that is to create an entire experience. It's not just the demo; it's everything.
This is storytelling.
It's a storytelling.
Yeah, yeah. That's wonderful advice, because we hear it all the time. Like, just focus on the pain points, solve those pain points, and the rest is history. You're fine after you do that. But what we're not hearing is how you address those pain points and how you tell the story around what happens next, what happens after. Like you're solving the pain points. Let's paint a picture. Let's tell a story.
Exactly.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. Vish, this has been, I love all of our conversations, but this has been super insightful and really helpful. I think a lot of people are going to take get a lot of value out of this, and maybe even take one or two of your little bits of advice and apply it. I hope so. Of
Well, my hope is that I can continue learning as well. Thank you for the opportunity.
course. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Cheers,
Bye,
buddy.
man.